Australia lifts its defence spending ahead of a potential meeting between Anthony Albanese and Donald Trump next week in New York. $12 billion is being committed to upgrade a critical shipyard. The Defence Minister joins me this morning. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. The Pentagon is still reviewing the AUKUS deal, but for Australia, it's full steam ahead. The Prime Minister is today announcing $12 billion will be spent over the next decade, upgrading the Henderson shipyard in Western Australia. This new money goes at least some way to meeting US demands for Australia to lift defence spending. It follows a week of mixed success for Anthony Albanese in the Pacific. A security deal with Vanuatu has stalled, but new treaties with Fiji and PNG are on the cards. It's all part of Australia's strategic contest with China. Over in the Liberal Party, meanwhile, it's not so much strategic contest as open warfare. Susan Lee dumped Jacinta Price to the backbench, but divisions over the party's direction are far from settled.
We all ready to go? Okay.
Jacinta Price has doubled down on her refusal to apologise to the Indian community.
My comments were certainly clumsy.
Senior colleagues phoned her and demanded she apologise.
I had the guts to ring her and say, I think you should apologise to the community.
Apologise, move on, and get off it.
Yeah, I think she should.
The issue that's of great concern, which I won't be silenced on, is the issue of mass migration.
It is very hard for any major party to govern without the support of multicultural communities.
This issue has been hugely damaging and divisive within the Liberal Party.
Do you have confidence in her leadership?
Look, again, those matters are for our party room.
Full confidence in her leadership?
Those matters are for our party room.
And after a week of sustained infighting, that was the red line.
Susan Lee has dumped Senator Jacinta Price.
Confidence in the leader is a requirement for serving in the shadow ministry.
I think there has been mishandling on all sides.
I do support the decision. It's extremely disappointing.
I don't think it is the last time we've seen her on the front bench.
May I take this opportunity as leader of the Liberal Party to apologise to all Indian Australians.
Anthony Albanese's Pacific Charm offensive has hit a Chinese wall.
Australia has failed to seal an important security agreement.
National agreement is still a subject for us to discuss.
This visit memorable for what didn't happen.
I'm very confident that it will be able to be signed soon.
Some Vanuatu ministers reportedly uncomfortable about excluding China.
We respect Vanuatu's sovereignty.
The struggle to deal with runaway climate change will be back in the political arena next week. The Albanese government is expected to deliver its 2035 target.
The lack of meaningful action by the world's highest emitters continue to put our very existence at risk.
Action on climate change is the entry fee to credibility in this region.
As our government mulls a decision on a major offshore gas project.
Gas has an important role to play in the transition.
Going down the fossil fuel production expansion is an internationally wrongful act under international law. That's something that Australia should consider.
Woodside's Northwest Shelf gas project in WA has received final approval from the federal government.
The approval allows for the extended operation of an existing gas processing plant. Well, I'll obviously leave it for Pacific leaders to speak for themselves. Thanks for coming along.
And my guest this morning is Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles. First, let's check what's making news. The government's $12 billion commitment for the Henderson Defence Precinct is carried across most outlets. It involves building dry docks, which the US could also use for maintenance of its nuclear-powered submarines. The Washington Post, meanwhile, reports US Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio privately told Richard Marles at the White House just over 2 weeks ago that AUKUS would not be terminated. One unnamed source in the piece says the message from the Trump administration was that AUKUS will be fine. Australia and Papua New Guinea are set to sign a defence treaty in Port Moresby tomorrow when the Prime Minister and Defence Minister head there to mark PNG's 50th anniversary of independence. PNG's Defence Minister has told the ABC the treaty will involve totally integrated forces and an article similar to Article 4 of NATO, which requires the two sides to consult each other when threatened. And finally, Labor has won the by-election in the New South Wales state seat of Kiama, vacated by convicted rapist Gareth Ward. The Liberal vote plunged to just 26%. It's likely to put more pressure on leader Mark Speakman. Well, we'll come to that defence announcement after we've heard more from Richard Marles. We're going to begin, though, with the Liberal Party. Susan Lee had no choice but to sack Jacinta Price from her shadow ministry, particularly after her refusal to back the leader. But this doesn't resolve much. Liberals are deeply divided over their direction and the sort of party they want to be. This was a damaging rupture over the issue of migration. The bigger fight that's coming over climate change is likely to be even worse. Let's bring in the panel. We're joined this week by Mark Kenny, Isabella Higgins and Greg Sheridan. Very good morning to all of you. Mark, this episode in the Liberal Party over the last week or so really has shone a spotlight, I suppose, on the big underlying problem, the big underlying question. What sort of party do they want to be?
Yeah, it certainly has. I mean, if the election didn't shine that light, then this certainly has sharpened the focus of it now because the Liberal Party was absolutely spanked, banished basically from the cities of Australia. And we see Jacinta Price, who is obviously a sort of a new force in conservative politics, a new populist force, dictating the terms here. And I think Susan Lee, you know, as you said in your intro there, she had no choice in the end but to dismiss Jacinta Price. But I don't think this issue is going away. Yeah, and Isabella, we know Susan Lee wants to modernise the party, clearly wants to win back urban seats and win back government one day where they've been wiped out. But the view of Jacinta Price and her supporters is quite different on issues like, obviously, migration. She calls it mass migration. On net zero, wants to get rid of it. Wants to focus on issues in remote Indigenous communities. The Chinese Communist Party take a more aggressive line. There's quite a few areas, right, where there's a fundamental difference.
And I think this was an important moment for the Liberal Party to say, do we want to be a party that has rhetoric that's based in hate and exclusion, which is what these comments from Jacinta Price were. They were discriminatory, they were racist, and it was a moment for Susan Lee to come out and say, that's not who we want to be as the Liberal Party. And after that huge defeat at the last election, I think there would be many people who would say that's necessary if we want to bring more people into the tent, if we want to have more appeal. I think it's really interesting what it does for Jacinta Price as well. I think it shows that she is a relatively inexperienced politician who sort of has one mode, that she's able to go in and destroy an idea, which we saw very much with the Voice referendum. But when it comes to selling a vision or talking about complicated or nuanced policy areas, she's not really able to do that yet. When she was put under pressure, she made these comments, and whether she, you know, it was a remark she made under pressure or if she said it with intent, it shows she's either an amateur in some ways or that she has the ability to make major miscalculations.
Well, just to pick up on what you said there, I mean, she did offer corrections. She called it clumsy. She didn't apologise, but were they racist remarks, Greg?
No. Look, Jacinta Price is not a racist. That's, with respect, that's a preposterous assertion. I think the episode demonstrates something else. Tremendous incompetence on Jacinta Price's part. She should have known exactly what she wanted to say about immigration and not gone any further. And then tremendous amateurism from both her and Susan Lee. It was very badly managed. This is a Liberal Party special. Everybody involved in it looks bad. And I would have a slightly different view of the challenge this offers the party, however. It's not really, are they going to be, you know, a centre party or a centre-right party or a little bit more populist or whatever. Do they have the capability to prosecute any public policy argument at all? So,
well, I guess that's a separate question, isn't it? Their competence in whatever they choose, what lane they choose. But
exactly, but I think that's much more important than what lane they choose. So they have had great success on the climate matter when they've argued it as an economic issue, smashing victories for Tony Abbott and so forth. They've had great failure at state levels where they've embraced centre. You know, they've been carbon copies of the Labor governments they're trying to displace, and the electorate says we're not interested. Now, I think the key is they've got to have 3 or 4 things they're campaigning on. They've got to be passionate advocates of the issue.
There's no doubt in politics it's about prosecuting your argument, but first you have to decide what you're arguing, right? This is
you have
fundamental.
to decide. Yeah, you have to decide
what lane you're in.
Exactly. What lane you're in is important, I think, because you have to decide, are we with the majority of the Australian people, or are we capable of getting to a majority of the Australian people on this and other issues when combined, or are we not? Will our position on this be so toxic, so unpopular with the electorate that it doesn't matter how well we prosecute the arguments in other areas, we can't get to a majority? And right now, this is a party that's lost 33 seats over the last 2 elections. As I said, it's hardly represented in the metropolitan areas now.
Well, there's a view that they've turned off younger voters, women, Chinese Australians, now Indian Australians.
And Peter Dutton was quite happy to basically, sort of not go after the teal seats, the voters in the teal seats that they'd lost at the last election. Now they seem to be happy to be shedding the Indian vote and potentially other votes as well. So I do think there is a racial
If they alienate the Indian vote, they're completely bananas and even sillier than I thought they were. But the lesson in international politics is not that Conservative parties collapse because of the demographics. 10 years ago, you could read demographics saying the Republicans are never going to win another election because they can't get the Hispanic vote. Trump, much more, in a far more aggressive lane than anything the Liberals have ever dreamed of, got record high Hispanic votes, young people votes, black votes.
So they just needed Trump.
Well, I think
well, that's what she thinks.
In politics, what you need is a Steve Waugh and a couple of batters who won't sell their wickets cheaply. And you can be against net zero or for net zero, but you've got to, that great line in the book of Revelation, be for me or against me, don't be lukewarm or I will spit you out.
Right. I just want to pick up on Jacinta Price's comments about the Indian migrants too. I think it's important to say she was spreading misinformation that was appealing to existing racist views that exist in the community about Indian people. And I think that turns off a lot of people, and it's important to call out what it is.
And it's certainly wrong to say that we have a discriminatory immigration.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
she was absolutely wrong about that.
It was complete
100%
misinformation.
Wrong. And what's the other message it sends to Indian people coming to Australia? It says you're not coming here for the contribution you make, which every politician who's trying to clean this up has been out there talking about the contribution that Indian Australians make. The message is you're coming here because of some sort of political benefit that you bring one side to the other, and that you move as a sort of a single block.
And the poll was ropey anyway. Even the pollsters say this wasn't 85%, it was 65% of Indian Australians who vote Labor after preferences, and I wouldn't even believe that poll. Every Indian I know is much more conservative than me.
Yeah, who reckon they have very strong support amongst the...
I think it also says to the Indian community, politicians are happy to use you as a scapegoat if it suits us, and that's really damaging.
Just on the nuts and bolts, I guess, of where this leaves the various players in the Liberal Party right now, putting aside the bigger picture question we've been discussing about where they're heading as a political force. So, yes, there were the comments, then the refusal to apologise, but it was this exchange that really sealed the deal.
Do you have confidence in her leadership?
Look, again, those matters are for our party room.
Have full confidence in her leadership?
Those matters are for our party room.
And the next day, Susan Lee acted swiftly, of course, dumped it to the backbench, and the next day offered this apology.
May I take this opportunity, as leader of the Liberal Party, to apologise to all Indian Australians and indeed others who were hurt and distressed by the comments that were made.
So where does this leave Mark Susan Lee's leadership? Is she weakened, strengthened? No net change, do you think, in terms of the internal support for her as leader?
I don't think you could say her position strengthened. I think you'd have to conclude that it has been weakened. A shot's been fired, cumbersomely, however, and I don't think, as I say, Jacinta Price or the people she represents in the party, but also in the sort of sections of the right-wing media, are going to go away. I think this shows that there is a lot of ill will towards her and her project of taking the Liberal Party to where Australians are. That, you know, Jacinta Price and her supporters have got another project entirely. It's not.
And where's she? Where's the senator left? Do you think after all of this? I mean, there's a list of mistakes or clumsy things she said, or worse, however you want to describe it. But there is still a lot of support for who she is and what she can do for the Conservative side of the party.
I think she does see herself as Australia's Trump. I think she's positioning herself that way. I think being on the front bench brought limitations, and immediately she ran up against them, and she was unprepared to apologise, even though she said those things were cumbersome. So I think we have an indication of the way she's going to operate. She's going to be emboldened in some ways. she's now going to speak out. Why she was speaking out on the issue she was speaking out on from a position as Shadow Minister for
I think it's
Defence support.
That seems to be politics these days. You talk about whatever you want to talk about, not just your portfolio.
Yeah, well, she's going to be talking quite a lot, I think.
I did look talking about how she sees her future, and we know Tony Abbott is a big supporter of Jacinta Price. He's told Karen Barlow at the Saturday paper, I think Jacinta is one of the few Liberal MPs with a proven ability to provide national leadership. So she's got people obviously backing her.
That is a stunning comment to come from a former Prime Minister, a former leader, one of the few Liberals with the capacity for national leadership. What about the actual leader that they have? What about others that even on the Conservative side of the party that people talk about, people like Andrew Hastie and James Patterson? And
I think it's really important sometimes to separate her performance on The Voice from her performance on everything else. I mean, people thought she did a great job during the Voice referendum campaign, but her appeal and really what underlined her message was, I'm an Indigenous Australian, listen to me.
Precisely, yeah.
Now, that doesn't work for every other topic area. And I think when you look at Jacinta Price, she said, listen to me when it comes to the Voice referendum. I'm in touch with remote communities, like I know what people really want. And then if you look at how those remote communities voted, it was very different. They overwhelmingly voted in support of the Voice referendum. So I think if you remove the way she performed on that and you look at the way she performed in other areas, I mean, even when she was the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Affairs, she put forward very few policies. You didn't see her selling a vision. She is really someone who comes in and knows how to destroy something.
I think that's unfair. I think she has had an enormous victory in Australian politics on The Voice, and I think she was brilliant, courageous and effective, and she inspired a lot of people. However, politics requires discipline and professionalism, and since the election she has not shown discipline or professionalism. This was a stupid controversy, completely unnecessary, tremendous benefit to the Labor Party. Everything Jacinta Price has done since the election has benefited the Labor Party. Now, to be effective in parliamentary politics, you've got to show you're a team player and you've got to be competent on the issues.
And that's the question now. Will she be a team player, as you say, or continue to make life very difficult for the party? Look, we want to move on, but just to note quickly on this, the next big one, the net zero fight, is likely to be even uglier for the party. There is a concern that this could, there's a growing view that this will break up the Libs and the Nats in the coalition once more, but a real concern that even frontbenchers might cross the floor on net zero, and where does that leave Susan Lee? We'll see. This is the big one that's to come. Time to talk to the Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles. He's in Western Australia, along with the Prime Minister, to announce the government's $12 billion investment in the Henderson shipyard. This money will be spent over the next decade to help build landing craft, general purpose frigates and docking capabilities for the AUKUS submarines. It's an increase in Australia's defence spending and just happens to come a week before the Prime Minister is due to arrive in New York, where a meeting with Donald Trump is on the cards. Richard Marles, welcome to the program.
Good morning, David. How are you?
Very well. So what will this $12 billion for the Henderson precinct buy for Australia and potentially for the United States?
Well, this is the first but very significant initial piece of money for delivering the Henderson precinct. It's over a decade. I should say that the early estimates of what Henderson will cost is in the order of $25 billion. So this is not the whole amount, but you can see it's a very significant chunk. What this does is help build the security in terms of this facility. This is going to be a facility which does, as you say, sustain nuclear-powered submarines, so it needs to be very secure. It will have the laydown for surface fleets, and you can imagine that will need undercover areas such as sheds. It will provide for a contingency docking capability for our submarine sustainment, and it will begin the process of building our dry docking capability for our submarines, and that's going to be really important as we go into the 2030s. And all of this, as you said, underpins the building of Army's landing crafts. That's going to happen from next year, which is actually why it's so important to make this announcement now, to give momentum going into next year. But we are moving down the path soon of being able to do greater sustainment on nuclear-powered submarines, and we're looking to seeing the Mogami-class frigate come to Australia to be built here, and that would happen at the Henderson Defence Precinct as well.
So Australia's current defence spending is just over 2% of GDP, and it's due to get to 2.3% over the next 8 years. What will this additional money take that defence spend to?
Well, look, I mean, to be frank, the percentage GDP number is not one that we focus on. I mean, and partly that's because
but others do. Sorry about
sure,
it. But obviously the Americans do, and these are your numbers about what it's getting to 2.3%. So what will this mean?
Yeah, but partly why we don't focus on it is because you can look at a range of different measures. I mean, if you take the way NATO accounts for GDP spending, our spending right now is at 2.8% of GDP. If you line it up with how NATO accounts for NATO countries' defence spending. The important point is this. When you include what we are spending here, it is the better part, relative to what we inherited when we came to government back in 22, of an additional $70 billion of defence spending over the decade. And what that represents is the biggest peacetime increase in our defence spending in Australia's history. So it is a hugely significant amount that we have been putting into defence since we've come to government. And this is all about focusing on the way we do things, which is to look at what our strategic challenge is, what sort of defence force we need to build in order to meet that, and then resourcing it.
I understand that, but just back to the question on what percentage this takes us to, does this get us to 2.5% of GDP?
Well, again, I mean, you're talking about...
You must know.
Yeah, you're talking about a particular measure. As I say, the NATO measure, which everyone is focusing on in terms of the commitment that NATO made a couple of months ago, we're at 2.8 right now.
Okay.
So
what
really
would this do? Would that take us to 2.9 or 3?
Well, we are focused on the dollar amount.
You must know the percentage, though, with respect, Minister.
Sure.
What is it?
But precisely because there are differing numbers out there, the way in which we are...
Well, just give us one of those numbers. What is it?
Well, I've just said to you that the NATO figure for what we are right now is 2.8. I mean, people can go off and do their calculations. At the end of the day, what this is an additional $12 billion over the decade, and it takes our increased defence spending since we came to government to the better part of $70 billion over the decade, and that is it is the biggest peacetime increase in our defence spending.
You mentioned the dry docks that this will build, and I appreciate that's going to take some time under this investment. Will the US be able to use them for maintenance on their nuclear-powered submarines?
So where the US sustains its submarines is ultimately a matter for them, of course. But this is an AUKUS facility, and so I would expect so, is the answer to that question. I mean, first and foremost, this is a sovereign capability. This is about being able to sustain and maintain Australia's future submarines. But it is very much a facility which is being built in the context of AUKUS, in the context of the optimal pathway for us acquiring a nuclear-powered submarine capability. And so in that context, I would expect that in the future this would be available to the US.
Because we know the US has an issue here. I think it's about a third of their submarine fleet at any given time is in maintenance, and they want to get that number down so they can get more submarines in the water. It seems to me this is something you probably discussed a couple of weeks ago when you were there in the White House, was it?
Well, certainly the contribution that AUKUS plays, and by that I mean both HMAS Sterling and the Henderson Defence Precinct, to the sustainment and maintenance of US submarines is a really important point to make.
So you talked about this at the White House just over 2 weeks ago, about what you're announcing today?
Oh, not specifically what we announced today, but we obviously spoke about AUKUS.
And maintaining US submarines at Henderson?
Well, perhaps more broadly, to answer that question, the contribution that we can make in terms of the sustainment and maintenance of US submarines in Australia, because there's lower level maintenance which would happen at HMAS Sterling, but there is the opportunity here, and this is really to the point of your question, of seeing much greater sea days for the American fleet occur by virtue of the use of Australia, by virtue of the cohort of people that we are building up right now to work on nuclear-powered submarines. You know, today there's 150 Australian workers at Pearl Harbor working on US Virginia-class submarines. By the end of this year, that number will go to 200. That's a significant number in American terms. We are building a cohort here who will be able to work on nuclear-powered submarines, including American nuclear-powered submarines, and that is of enormous advantage in terms of getting more US Virginia-class submarines out to sea for the US Navy.
And makes it easier then for the US to transfer those Virginia-class submarines to Australia?
Well, indeed, and that's part of the plan here. I mean, we've been really clear from the moment that we announced the optimal pathway back at the beginning of 2023 that there is a challenge in terms of getting more sea days out of the US Virginia-class fleet for the US Navy, and indeed getting production rates for new Virginia-class submarines up. We're confident we will meet those milestones, and it is an important part of creating the space for the first of those Virginia-class submarines to be transferred to Australia in the early 2030s.
Okay, and that's what it certainly looks like, so it's good to have that confirmed. This is part of the plan. You did discuss this at the White House. The Washington Post reports that Marco Rubio privately told you that everything's going to be fine with AUKUS, with that Pentagon review. Is that right?
Well, look, I'm not going to go into those meetings beyond what I've already said publicly, but perhaps what I would say is I've been speaking with my American counterparts since the moment that Donald Trump was inaugurated. Literally, I was there just a few weeks after that, meeting with my counterpart, Pete Hegseth. And in all the conversations that I've had, there has been an enormous sense of positivity about the role that AUKUS can play for the United States. I mean, it's clearly important for us, but for the United States. And yes, they are having a review into AUKUS, something that we welcome. It's an opportunity to work out how we can do AUKUS better. That's exactly what Britain did when they came to government, or when this government came to government last year, what we did, in fact, when we came to government back in 2022. So it's actually a really important review, but the foundation of why AUKUS is important for the United States is something that has been well understood in all the conversations I've had, and it's not going to surprise you that as a Defence Minister, this is a topic I talk to my American counterparts about, both in terms of what it can mean for us, but how we're going in making it happen, and we are doing well.
You've said you know yourself when that Pentagon review will be released. Do you also know what it's going to say?
Oh, they're going through their review process, so I don't know what it's going to say. I mean, nor am I about to preempt that. But yes, I do have a sense of when it will be done. I mean, the Americans have actually been really good with us in terms of taking us through the process of how this review is going to be undertaken, and also how we can contribute, and we will.
Look, before we leave the US, since you were there a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump has renamed the Defence Department the Department of War. Pete Hegseth is now the Secretary of War. Is that how the Australian government will now refer to the department and to Pete Hegseth?
Well, that's the title that he has. So, I mean, we're going to refer to them in terms of the titles that they have. Okay. I mean, there is no intention, obviously, for us to change our own nomenclature in terms of my role. I'll be the Minister for Defence, and I'm very happy to be the Minister for Defence, but we respect the way in which other countries, name the functions that they do.
Now, you're heading to Papua New Guinea tomorrow with the Prime Minister for the 50th anniversary of PNG's independence, and you're due to sign this defence treaty tomorrow as well while you're there. Why does Australia want this treaty?
Well, we began a process earlier this year with my counterpart, Billy Joseph, of seeking to really update our defence cooperation arrangements with Papua New Guinea, which actually date back to 1977. So they need a refresh because we're doing so much more with PNG now. I think it is fair to say that as we've walked down that path over the course of the last few months, and we've been doing it with a view to having, signing this agreement in conjunction with the 50th anniversary of PNG's independence, it's fair to say that a lot more ambition has been brought to this agreement, and we are really excited about the agreement that we will be signing in the next few days. It certainly will transform the defence relationship between Australia and PNG, but I think beyond that, if you look at the various defence agreements that we have with countries around the world, actually, it is hugely significant in that context.
Will this treaty have a similar clause to NATO's Article 4, that there will be consultation if either of the parties comes under threat?
Well, look, I'm not about to preempt what is going to be signed.
The thing is, your counterpart, Billy Joseph, has, as you know, he's spoken to the ABC and said that there will be this sort of Article 4 clause.
Well, again, the Prime Minister will be signing this in the next few days, and so I'm going to let the Prime Minister make those announcements, and you'll see them shortly enough.
But is there some confusion about this, or is your counterpart right?
Look, I'm I am very pleased to see the excitement that Billy is bringing to this, and it does, to be honest, reflect the way in which we've been going about this agreement since the moment that he and I first met to do this refresh back in January of this year, and it's turned into something much more than a refresh. It is a really significant agreement that we will be signing, but it does reflect the fact, David, that we are doing so many more exercises together, so many more operations together. We are really working hand in glove as two defence forces. I think this is profoundly important. We've made no secret of the fact that we've got an eye to recruiting out of PNG into the Defence Force.
So Papua New Guineans will be able to join the Australian Defence Force, and that will give them a pathway to Australian citizenship. Just had a question around this. Will they get paid the same as Australians who join the Defence Force, and could that lead to, I guess, a brain drain, an exodus from PNG's Defence Force to Australia?
So I don't want to get ahead of it in the sense that we've got an eye to it. We're certainly looking at walking down this path, but to be fair, there would be a series of announcements that we would need to make in the future to kind of fully express what you've just said there. Yeah. But I do want to make one point in terms of the question that you've asked. People who work in the Defence Force are going to be paid the same amount. I mean, there's no ifs and buts about that. And we've said, as we have opened the Defence Force up to non-Australian citizens, so we did that first with New Zealand and then with Five Eyes countries, that it would be a pathway to citizenship. That's because we ultimately want citizens in the Defence Force, and that's exactly how it operates right now when we do lateral transfers.
But do you limit it to certain numbers so that you don't get an exodus from Papua New Guinea's Defence Force?
Well, numbers will clearly be managed, and we need to be careful about how we do that if we're walking down this path with any of the countries in the Pacific, for sure. This is something we would be doing hand in glove with PNG as we walk down this path. I mean, this is something that PNG has spoken to us about, so they are excited about this. Again, I don't want to get too far ahead of it. We have an eye to it. The agreement contemplates it. But there is work to go here. But this is an important path, we think, in terms of the relationship between our two countries and also growing numbers within the ADF.
Just one more question on that PNG treaty. Will there be any restriction on what PNG can do with China under this deal?
Again, I'm not about. Let us announce the agreement when we do so in the next few days. I think what you can take, though, is that this is a really important statement from Papua New Guinea and indeed from Australia to each other. And I think this is Papua New Guinea making it really clear that traditional partners, and they've talked about this a lot, that traditional partners is where they look to in terms of their security. And from an Australian point of view, PNG is obviously on our northern flank. It really matters that we have the very best relationship that we can have with PNG in a security sense, and I'm really excited about the fact that this agreement is going to give expression to that.
And look, just one final matter away from defence. The government's special envoy for tackling Islamophobia handed his recommendations to the government, and they were released on Friday. The report calls for a zero tolerance approach to racism amongst members of Parliament, as well as religious discrimination law more generally. But as far as MPs are concerned, what the envoy seems to be saying is that there should be some sanctions on politicians who say things that are racist. Would you support that?
Well, look, we are going to go through the process of responding to this report. It's a very significant report with 54 recommendations, so we're going to give it the respect that it deserves and take the time to go through it. But let me be clear, the Parliament should not be a place for people to be making racist statements.
Should there be a penalty or a sanction if a politician says something racist?
Well, the way in which this is described is in terms of how parties govern themselves, and from the Labor Party's point of view, we have a zero tolerance approach to racism being spoken about from any of our members. I mean, it is utterly unacceptable, and no one speaks in those terms. We welcome the report that has been done by Mr Malik. It is a really important body of work. We are going to review it and give it the attention that it deserves. But dealing with Islamophobia in this country is something which, as Mr Malik has said, is become intensified, particularly over the last couple of decades after September 11. It is something that we need to deal with, and it's part of the ongoing work of our nation.
Defence Minister Richard Marles, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.
And coming up, we'll have more on that report from the envoy on combating Islamophobia. Let's get back to our panel. We're joined once more by Greg Sheridan, Isabella Higgins and Greg Sheridan. Mark, just on defence matters there, the Henderson upgrade obviously has a big local component to it. We're going to build the surface vessels, the frigates, the landing craft and so on. But it also clearly has an eye on the US and keeping things sweet when it comes to AUKUS.
Yes, Australia's definitely prepared to sort of open its wallet in regard to AUKUS, and to do so early as a statement of the sort of commitment. So the US is getting the early dividends from this agreement, and if we're to take the government at its word, getting positive vibes back from the US about that. But I think the question for me arises, well, of course you would. At this stage, it's all upside for the US, really. The question down the track is whether these submarines are going to be made available to Australia, and then the degree of interoperability and what the implications are for that, particularly in a time of extremis, if there were some serious defence question that arose, the degree, the question about sovereignty and so forth. Those things are somewhat down the track. So at the moment, they're getting good noises from the US, but why wouldn't they? We're paying for everything, sending big cheques.
Sending big cheques. I think 1.6 billion's already been handed over for their industrial base. But Isabella, this does seem like a clever way of upgrading our own facilities that can help the US get more of their own subs into the water, and then therefore helps them be able to hand over those Virginias down the track.
Totally. I also thought it was interesting when we were listening to the minister who said, we don't want to talk about GDP, but actually it's higher than you might think. It's, by NATO standards, it's 2.8, which is pretty close, but we don't want to talk about it. Yeah. Slightly confused messaging there, but I think certainly from Australia's point of view, this will go down pretty well with the US and make these conversations in the AUKUS space a little bit smoother. But as Mark said, I mean, it's been a big win for the US so far.
Yeah, that's true. Now, Greg, you've not been a fan of the government's level of defence spending for some time. What do you make of today's announcement?
Well, David, it's a very welcome development. It's a good thing. But, I mean, God bless Richard, but he was his usual slippery, ridiculous self in his interview with you. So the government's documents are full of percentage of GDP figures. Absolutely. Where did you get that figure, 2.33%? It's
in the government document.
Big letters in the government's documents. Now they won't talk about it because their defence spending is so paltry. This is actually a paltry amount of money, $12 billion over a decade. That means a massive increase. I think the reason he wouldn't tell you what increase it represents is because it represents no increase in effect.
Yeah, I think my back of the envelope was a 0.1, if that.
Yeah, I mean, $1 billion a year. This is our commitment to enhance defence capability.
On top of some other spending, though, and some money that we've sent to the US.
The remark, we're spending, I agree with your analysis, Mark, absolutely. Why would Trump say no to AUKUS at the moment? The moment of decision comes in 2031, either by J.D. Vance or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or somebody, about whether they actually give a Virginia to Australia. So Trump has just got to lay back and take the money. But even the thing Richard keeps saying about this is the biggest increase in defence spending in peacetime in our history, that is just complete baloney, because what he's talking about is promised defence spending increases over the next 10 years. They've been in office now for nearly 4 years. And when they came into office, defence spending was 2% of GDP. It's still 2% of GDP. In the meantime, we've decided to acquire nuclear submarines, which every nation in history that does that has to massively increase their defence spending. Everyone who looks at it says you cannot possibly acquire nuclear submarines and have a competent defence force. Their pathetic announcement on drones last week, they're going to spend $1.7 billion over God knows how many years to produce a few dozen drones. Whereas Ukraine is sending
Ghost Shark undersea.
The Ghost Shark, and we might even get dozens of them. So they're nowhere near what the boffins want, which is affordable mass. Ukraine and Russia are using thousands of drones every day. Well, this is still... But having said all that, this is a good development, And providing maintenance facilities to American nuclear submarines is a real act of utility that we'll bring to the Americans. So that makes AUKUS more valuable.
It again raises those questions around, how intertwined we are. We're upgrading bases in the north for the bombers and other American kit, and this is all part of it as well. So there's no doubt we are.
This is a critical point. The idea that we could say no to the Americans.
Correct.
If the balloon went up in the South China Sea or Taiwan or anywhere else, the Americans would deploy forces from Australia and those forces would be attacked by China, without any doubt at all. The idea that, Richard Marles and Pat Conroy would convene a special interdepartmental committee meeting and we'd review it and, we'd have a white paper written on it and it'd take us 3 years. The war will be all finished long before any of that happens.
Speaking of regional security, Isabella, we've seen the PM in the Pacific focus on climate change, which we'll get to, but always there's a focus on security and the strategic contest with China in the Pacific as well. On Vanuatu, there was clearly a bit of frustration. The PM went there before going to the Pacific Islands Forum in the Solomon Islands, hoping to sign this deal with Vanuatu. It wasn't to be. Vanuatu is still going through its processes.
Some of my ministers and my MPs, they feel that it requires more discussions to particularly on some of the specific wordings in the agreement.
Yeah, so some of them still have a few issues about sovereignty. They don't like the idea of Australia vetoing deals that they might want to do with China down the track. But better news on Fiji. Looks like a treaty is going to be negotiated there, and tomorrow they're signing this one with PNG, which we just heard a fair bit about from Richard Marles and even more from his PNG counterpart as well, talking to Marion Farr there in PNG. What's this all about? Australia trying to secure all these deals in the Pacific?
Oh, I think we know exactly what it's about. It's about Australia trying to shore up its influence in the Pacific at a time when Pacific nations want ultimate sovereignty. I mean, these are countries that have been under colonial power. More and more, they want to look like they're standing on their own 2 feet and like they have ultimate sovereignty. And I think if you look at the Vanuatu deal, it makes sense that a country might not want another bigger influential power in the region to be able to say, no, you can't do that. I think then when it comes to PNG, they are a very close neighbour of ours. If you stand on islands in the Torres Strait, you can actually see PNG. And when we look at our northern border up there, I think this presents real opportunity to strengthen our operations in that part of Australia, in that sea area in particular, if there is that really close collaboration, as has been suggested between PNG and Torres Strait, which has historically had really close ties.
Yeah, and it locks in that future of integration, as the PNG Defence Minister has said. But Mark, when it comes to climate change in the Pacific, there are some different views. There was some criticism of the Woodside Northwest Shelf gas project being extended out to 2070. We didn't see the Prime Minister announce the 2035 climate target before going to the Pacific, but he's expected to do it this week, might come a bit later this week. From all we're hearing, where do you think this one's going to land?
It's really hard to tell. I've spoken to a few people in the government, and the line that comes out of it is that they want to be realistic and ambitious at the same time. They want they want it to be somewhere in.
Ambitious but achievable.
Yeah, that's right. Ambitious but achievable. So it's the sort of band we're talking about is somewhere between 75% cut by 2035, which is quite steep. Or something less than that, probably down to 65. Anything under that, it does not qualify as ambitious at all.
It may be lower than that. I won't be surprised if it is a little lower than that. Look, we'll see. But on this range, the Climate Change Authority has been consulting stakeholders on 65 to 75%, or it was. Look, I don't know if there has been enough public debate around what the number means and what's the right number for Australia to settle on. But some of the businesses who do want an ambitious target, Atlassian, IKEA, Unilever and so on, they commissioned this poll from YouGov. Take a look at it, and it backs what they are arguing for. There is about a third who want net zero by 2035, about a third who want 75%, and then a third who don't want any further target for 2035. So strong support for a pretty ambitious target. Yeah, as I say, I'd be surprised if they end up with 75%.
I would too, but I'd be surprised if it goes as low as 65. I mean, maybe you've got better sources than I have, but I've spoken to a few people, and that is regarded as being not ambitious enough. From
I think there have been people in the business community and other industry that have said they'd like to see that number with a 5 in front of it. So there are certainly people advocating for less. But I think with targets, I mean, there's symbolism as well. They set aspiration, and there's the thing about it being realistic, but it also sets the aspiration for, you know, all business in Australia, government as well.
The important point is the sector by sector stuff, really, isn't it? I mean, you have to actually have a target and a way of getting to that target, and you need to look at that in a granular way. You can't just sort of
It's a really good point, and that's what we'll see, I understand, this week when they announce the target as well, is this breakdown of how they're going to do it, and that's what really matters.
David, I think there's no chance that we'll reach the target, whatever the target is. Australian debates are very derivative. We're always a few years behind Europe. The truth is the world is actually moving away from net zero. Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, said Germany could disappear, would make no difference to the world climate. The Economist magazine had a cover story just a few weeks ago saying, look, let's forget about net zero as a guiding principle because it's just not going to happen. It said, I can quote verbatim the line from its editorial, it said, most countries' pledges for net zero are scarcely imaginable physically, much less politically feasible. The emissions have been rising, and global emissions rose last year. They've risen every year since COVID. Last year, more energy was generated through coal than ever before in human history. Now, I think we should be reducing our emissions, but the idea that we or the world or anyone else is getting to net zero is fanciful. We're a rich country because we export minerals, gas, coal, iron ore, and therefore we can put enormous subsidies behind renewable energies if we want to. If we ever get to net zero, that means we don't have those mineral industries. Well, everything we love in Australia, Medicare, the ABC, renewable subsidies, comes from our mineral wealth. But theoretically, under a net zero scenario, we wouldn't be exporting that.
This is the challenge of the transition, as they say. There are others like Matthias Cormann, who this week said he'd gone through all the data and was convinced Australia was on track to meet its 2030 target and then net zero by...
Well, you can meet the target if you do enough accounting tricks. You can say, well, we'll exclude the whole of agriculture, or we won't count transport. How are we going to have international aviation?
Is that what you're suggesting they're doing? My understanding is Matthias Cormann said that he'd gone through the figures and he thinks that that 2030 target of 43% is achievable. The government certainly says it's at 42% at the moment and hopes to get to 43.
So we've got to move on. I want to talk about Charlie Kirk because this was a big moment in the United States this week, the assassination of this, well, prominent MAGA influencer. There's a suspect who police have arrested a couple of nights ago. And look, tragically, the United States has this long, terrible history of political violence and assassinations. It does seem to be getting worse, though, in recent years. And Isabella, little seems to change after each one of these, whether it's the gun culture or the tone of political debate. Is there any sign that there'll be change after this one?
I think there has been an outpouring of grief for Charlie Kirk, even though he was this deeply divisive figure. And I think what's quite interesting about his death is the way it played out on social media, because there is less moderation happening on platforms. His death was very visible to people. There was footage of the moment he was struck by this bullet, and it was very graphic, it was very violent. And I wonder if for a population or generations who become really immune to gun violence, it was a moment where they could see just how horrific a death by a gunshot is. And if anyone has seen that footage, it is really horrible. And I wonder if that contributed to that outpouring of grief. Certainly the political rhetoric in America was that this was a horrible crime, but really no conversations about tightening gun restrictions. So I don't know if it moves the dial at all. It seems like nothing really can in America, but I do think it is a little bit of a turning point in the way people might view gun violence, or maybe this was a moment that humanised it just a little bit.
Perhaps. In terms of the political debate, though, Greg, we saw Donald Trump very quickly say this was the fault of the radical left. Do you think this changes anything, this moment? David,
this is really a deeply depressing and tragic moment. Charlie Kirk made himself available to people. He generally, was open to people disagreeing with him.
At these university campuses.
Yeah, spoke to people in person. He wasn't a keyboard coward. So that's going to be much harder to do, much less likely to do in the future. I think both sides of politics have tried to react well, but both sides have also displayed very troubling reactions at their extremes. So there are some people on the far right who pretend that all of the political violence in America comes from the left, whereas the fact is it's on both the far left and the far right. There were some people on the left who kind of joked and laughed about his death and said, well, what do you expect? Or if they killed Hitler, the Republican right would say, remember him in your prayers. That's been really ugly. Anyway, if you Google, you know, left-wing reactions to Charlie Kirk's death, there's something shockingly dehumanised about that. I am an Irishman, so I'm optimistic by nature, but I tell you what, this is a very pessimistic moment.
It does feel like a very dark moment. We're going to run out of time, Mark, but look, I just wanted to get a comment too on the report from the envoy on combating Islamophobia. And his main point is we've got to renew this push for a Religious Discrimination Act. The Prime Minister's response was, I support it, but only if there's bipartisanship. Is that a fair response?
I think it's a fair response. I've always been troubled by this idea of trying to legislate on religious expression, religious freedom. I think it's highly problematic, and I think it's probably going to fail again. I think there's been a few attempts at it that haven't got anywhere. And I think it always ignores the fact that the majority of the population values secularism above religion and you know, sort of faith-based politics. Now, that's not to say anything against faith communities, but those freedoms need to be protected as well. And I think we'll see where this goes, but it's just it doesn't have a good record.
Greg, just a quick comment on that.
Oh, look, I agree with Mark that I think it's almost impossible to devise legislation which would not make things worse. And I think Albanese has been sensible and wise on this. I value religious freedom as much as anyone, and I think Australians value that as much as they value secularism. But a lot of things in society rely on common sense, and you can't legislate for every circumstance, and trying to do so probably makes things worse.
All right. Our panel, Greg Sheridan, Isabella Higgins, Mark Kenny, back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers. I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with cartoonist for The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, the one and only Kathy Wilcox, and a very warm welcome back.
Morning, Mike. Good to be here.
It's been a rough week for Susan Lee. She's faced opposition from within the opposition.
It's a tough gig trying to be moderate in a wild party.
You've top shelf this one. I really liked it, Kathy. How oof will not apologise thud.
Oh, surprisingly, the politics of division hasn't united them.
Yep.
Boom, boom.
Yep. David Pope has picked up on the fact that Susan flies her own plane. Unfortunately, there is no left wing on this plane, it's only right wing.
That's right, and also it's a kind of very solo kind of a plane. Maybe she needs to be flying a bigger plane and having the people inside it.
Air Susan, fly the unfriendly skies.
How's the listening tour?
So far I'd say it's net zero. Mark Knight has picked up on the Susan flying as well. I'm having real problem with my right wing as Jacinta seems to be weighing it down here.
Yes, indeed.
Ted O'Brien, he looks like he's a bit of a nervous flyer.
Well, you're counting on defying gravity, basically, aren't you?
Yeah. David Rowe has just beautifully drawn the LNP Indian takeaway here. Very spicy.
Yes, Jacinta and Alex agree that Vindaloo is great. Right, Alex? Did I, says Jacinta. I did. And then, who is Alex? Okay, so it's Alex Hawke.
Yeah.
Whatever these kind of bottles are with rats in them or something.
Looks like the dark spirits that Alex is carrying here. And the slight tremble, I love that.
Trying to keep it all together, guys.
Matt Golding has really brought it together. It's all fire and very little brand as far as the Liberals go. Probably she's warming herself on the embers of the glowing Liberal Party.
Yeah, I'm not imagining her staying in that frame.
Alan Moyer has picked this up, Susan Lee's Flying Circus. It really...
Got the fossil fuel lobby, and she's got nuclear, and there's Angus and the Nats.
Who seem to be firing at her.
Yep. There's a few holes in the
in the plane. Kathy, there were signs of troubled waters as the Prime Minister headed to the Pacific Island Forum.
Went there with his pen, didn't he? All ready to sign the papers.
Ready to sign the papers.
And then went
Nah. Brett Lethbridge has picked up beautifully on this. He's got some China merch here. I love China too. The Prime Minister had a wardrobe malfunction, all of his own making.
Tell me about it.
In the Pacific, especially Fiji, there's a thing called kalavata, where you all dress in the same coloured bulla shirts, and it literally means family together. He was non-kalavata, it seems.
Well.
Should I wear this shirt Dan Andrews gave me? I'm sure Dan would be very happy with that shirt.
But only when the others are wearing the red shirt.
Yes, that's right. Fiona Katauskas has picked up on rising sea levels. It's hard for them to concentrate with water lapping at their doors.
That's right. Well, Peter Dutton's joke
went down really well in the Pacific Islands. Pacific Islands Forum, of course, we'd love to take genuine climate action, but we have to protect the Australian way of life.
It is unfortunately the reality.
Yeah, I love the little flooded water lapping at the doors here, Fiona. And it might sound like a cartoon villain, Kathy, but the ghost shark is coming to our...
It will pass by unperceived, much like...
Nuclear subs.
Nuclear subs that nobody will ever see.
Ghost nuclear.
Ghost nuclear subs.
Peter Brollman has picked up on the large amounts of money that seemingly are going into the black hole in the sea.
Yeah.
The Marianas Trench. In fact, all of our defence budget is stealth. We throw money at it and we never see it again.
It reminds me actually of something my mother said too about whether one should purchase a holiday house, and she said you might as well just go to the cliff and throw the money in.
Over. Kathy, it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week. I'll let you do the honours.
Thanks, Mike, and back to you, David.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Mike. Time for some final observations. Quick one from me first. The Treasurer, people might recall, last year changed the investment mandate for the Future Fund. He wanted it to consider national priorities like housing, investment and the net zero transition. There were howls of outrage. This was turning it into a political slush fund. During the week, we saw the returns for the Future Fund for the financial year up 12%, just over 12%, which was double its target mandate. So the changed investment mandate doesn't seem to have hurt things so far. Greg.
So, David, on this week when we have a report on Islamophobia, it's right to consider religious freedom. So you mentioned it would be okay for me to mention I have a new book coming out, or that's just come out, called How Christians Can Succeed Today, Reclaiming the Genius of the Early Church. I think it's relevant for this reason. It examines Christians in the first 4 centuries when they were a minority in a very hostile culture, and all the cultural strategies they did to sell themselves to the culture. Now, everyone today, in a sense, is in a minority in our very vociferous culture, and what they did, of course, was behave kindly and decently and live exemplary lives. It's not a bad formula for all minorities, religious and otherwise, to emulate today.
Congrats on the book, Isabella.
I have 2, so I'll be really quick. This weekend, I think I'm the only Queenslander who travelled to Canberra and isn't going to the Brisbane Broncos versus Canberra Raiders finals match this afternoon. For the record, I think my dad's listening at home, so go Broncos. And my second observation is just what a significant week this has been for Aboriginal Victorians with the tabling of the treaty legislation. Huge amount of work has gone into getting to this point.
I'll only say go Raiders after that.
Fair enough too. Sadly, Charlie Kirk's assassination during the week was the 46th shooting on a school or university campus in the US this year. Wow. And by the end of the day, there'd been a 47th. So there was one even after that. So I think this just proves that America has a violence problem. It doesn't want to, whenever you talk about it, people jump all over you and say guns kill people. It's not people. People kill people, not guns, which is a lot of nonsense. But America has a violence problem. It's probably the richest, most uncivilized country in the world. If it wants to go on about freedom, it ought to start talking about the freedom not to be shot.
Great discussion this morning. Thank you all very much for joining us. Finally, Anthony Albanese did make a fashion faux pas at the Pacific Islands Forum during the week, but those with long memories may recall he's not the first Australian leader to turn up in the wrong shirt. And it gave New Zealand's Prime Minister a chance for some trans-Tasman ribbing. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
You've got to reiterate quite a lot to the Australians what they need to be doing and the rules sometimes. So You're making us all feel very excited about being here.